Well, welcome everybody to our April Lamoille County Democratic Committee meeting. It's a little unusual, our first one on Zoom, our first virtual meeting. So we're going to start out tonight's meeting with an update from our state representatives. And then we want them just to be able to speak from 3 to 5 minutes apiece. And then we'll get into a question and answer time. I'm unmuted everybody, so because we have a fairly small audience, I think that we can handle that. People will be able to ask questions of the reps, but I'd like them to first give their update. And then after that, we're going to have a very quick business meeting to approve our minutes and treasurer's report. And I'll give a little update on the state committee conference call that we had over the weekend. So we're blessed with having 4 state reps. We have Avram Pat and Dave Yakavone from Morristown, Elmore, Worcester, and Woodbury. We have Lucy Rogers from Cambridge and Waterville. And we have Dan Noyes, who covers Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere. Matt Hill was not able to make tonight's meeting. Lucy has a prior commitment, so we want to start with her. So Lucy, if you're ready, you can begin with your presentation.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Bruce, for organizing this. I think it's been definitely a process as we in the legislature have adjusted to working remotely just as everyone else has. And I think one of the kind of hidden silver linings is that for some people, it actually has made the legislature and state government more accessible for people for whom, for whatever reason, coming down to Montpelier to see us in person would not be possible. Now, every time a committee or hopefully eventually the full House or full Senate meet, it's live streamed on a live YouTube link, and then the YouTube video is saved for later. So people can watch it in live time or they can watch it later at their convenience. So I think for a lot of people who are stuck at home right now, it's actually a good, and particularly for school children, it's a good opportunity to be able to be a bit more engaged in Vermont's government. And I'd be happy to help anybody. You can reach out to me after, and I'd be happy to help someone figure out how to watch those videos. So 2 weeks ago, just under 2 weeks ago, the legislature passed our COVID-19 response package in Vermont. And a lot of what we were doing in that package is really just handing over authority to the administration, because during a state of emergency, things are changing so quickly on a day-to-day basis that the legislative process is not really able to respond to the immediate day-to-day changes. So a lot of power that would normally fall in the legislative branch ends up falling more to the administrative branch to respond more quickly. So in my committee, the House Healthcare Committee, pretty much since we passed that legislation, which gave even more authority to the administrative branch, just specific to the state of emergency time, we've really just used our time to make sure that we're caught up on what all is going on related to healthcare. And I want to be true to the 3 to 5 minute time limit, but I'll just leave you with a few resources that our committee has been taking testimony on that are important for people to know. So one is that Vermont Health Connect has opened a special open enrollment period through April 17th. So I believe it's April 17th through the middle of April. And so uninsured people can sign up for insurance during this period, or if people were behind on their payments and their insurance was terminated, it's an opportunity for them to re-sign up. In addition, as people's income changes, people are always able to sign up as a result of an income change and may also become eligible for Medicaid. Secondly, our committee also covers mental health, and the Department of Mental Health has a huge amount of links and resources on their website, the Vermont Department of Mental Health, pertaining to resources available to people during the COVID-19 crisis. It has been a really difficult time for people as far as mental health, because of the combination of social isolation, changes of routine, and then potential difficulty in seeing somebody in person. And then finally, for healthcare providers, we've been following closely a number of responses to ensure that the healthcare providers who are actually struggling with cash flow right now due to having canceled so many non-urgent procedures are able to stay open so that we have them and we have our rural healthcare infrastructure intact once this is all over. So I think that's pretty much what I have for an update. I have to go around 7, but if we're 2 questions by then, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Lucy. Let's go to Dave Iacovoni now. Dave?
Thank you, Bruce. And Bruce, sincerely, you've put a lot of hours into helping to orchestrate this and get it working. I really, really appreciate it. And to anybody who may be listening, I just really feel a deep amount of sorrow for what a lot of people are going through. It's a very, very hard time. In my committee, Appropriations Committee, we've been focusing in on the budget. I'll try to give you a scope of what we're looking at right now. We're anticipating, data does change frequently, a $350 million shortfall in this year's budget. There's 3 months left in the year, so there's no way you could cut services sufficiently, if that's the right word, to come up with a $350 million savings. We're about 30% of that shortfall is a direct result of depressed economic activity, less buying, less business going on. The remainder, the 70%, is a policy decision that was made to allow people to push their taxes out until July 15th. We don't know come July, the beginning of next fiscal year, really what our revenues will look like. We're anticipating that we may do a short 3-month budget, pretty much mathematical, based on what was spent last year, pass that budget, and then likely come back in August or September when we have the available data to us that our economists, for the governor and for the legislature, agree upon, and then we'll be in a better, hopefully, a better position to anticipate that. Now, we probably will do what's called a budget adjustment to try to shore up accounts this year. We are told that we're going to receive a check for $1.25 billion from the federal government on April 30th, and we can hopefully borrow from that and from our reserves, which are about 220 million, plus or minus, in order to bridge the gap and be able to finish up this year's budget. There are casualties, for want of a better word, that are accruing. Now, the Vermont State Colleges, very critical to all of us, certainly right here in this county. They're looking at approximately a $10 to $12 million shortfall by the end of this fiscal year. We're hoping that some of that 1.25 billion can be used, but we don't know yet. But that's critical, and we just don't know and this is nothing new. No one really knows the time frame for this disease, what the rollout will be. We also don't know, and we're worried about whether there'll be an uptick in fall. So what we have is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns, but we're trying to sort this out in the meantime the best we can. I've been focusing on a number of things. I'm sure all the representatives here have helping folks who are really challenged by unemployment. We had, as some of you may have heard, more unemployment applications filed in a 2-week period than we did all of last year. So it was just huge. And the governor is anticipating another wave of some 40,000 applications when the self-employment is figured out, which I hope is as quickly as possible. So I've been working on those numbers. I don't want them to in any way mask the human stories behind all of that, which maybe we can get to later. I don't want to run over my time, Bruce, so I'll stop there and let the others go.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave. Let's go to Avram.
Great. Hi, everybody. Just for the record, I want to say that last Friday, the day that I received the notice that one of our car registrations was due, I sent the money in immediately because the state needs the money. Even though I think I could have waited based on the legislation we passed. I'm on the Energy and Technology Committee, which was not one of the committees in the House that was dealing immediately with the urgent aid packages that were passed to deal with this crisis. But we are meeting now. We've had 3 meetings so far last week. We're meeting again this week. And what we're doing is, at this point, hearing reports from people in state government and from various service providers about both the state of their systems and any issues. So I can tell you, first of all, that in terms of our energy infrastructure and our telecommunications infrastructures in all medium, as they exist today, everything is functioning and there aren't any real problems with that. Our utilities are going to, and that's also true with other energy, with delivered fuels, gasoline and heating fuels and all of that. The electric utilities are going to see, both in Vermont and in our region and probably elsewhere, very significant revenue drops. And I'm not sure exactly how much or what that's going to mean, and it's going to differ in Vermont among the different utilities. For instance, I'm not so sure it's going to be that dramatic, if at all, at Washington Electric Co-op, where I used to work, because of the demographics. Everyone's at home now. It used to be that everyone left home to go to Green Mountain Power schools and places of employment, and that's not happening anymore for the time being. One of the, we've also been taking testimony about another area that we deal with, which is the state's major information systems, IT systems, such as Vermont Health Connect, which is functioning fine. The problems that we've heard about with the very antiquated system for IT system for our unemployment benefits. We heard about that and the type of intervention that had to happen in order to keep that system functioning with the volume that we know has increased. And the thing that we talked about, got a lot of testimony about, and that our committee is very concerned about, that we talked about on Friday, is internet access, both for students in our schools and for some teachers who live in places where there isn't sufficient broadband speed to be on Zoom, for instance. And so I wrote today to the 3 superintendents of the districts that cover the towns that Dave and I serve, to ask them for any numbers that they may have, anecdotal information. This is true for teachers as well as students. And the other thing that our committee has never looked at before is the economic issue. There are students living in homes where the physical internet access is not an issue. There is access. It's an economic issue. They can't afford to pay for it. Some of the providers and some of the school districts are in fact working on temporary fixes for that, but there are a significant number of Vermont students and some teachers who really cannot participate at this point in the remote learning that we're stuck with for the time being. So I'll just leave it at that. We're really at this point. And one other thing, I think we all know that when the legislature, the full House of 150 people actually starts meeting and voting on stuff again, it's going to be very difficult to get business done. And for that reason, I think we're going to have to focus on the absolute must-have legislation, the budget, the revenue bills, the transportation bill, the things that by law we have to pass. And some of the other major legislation that a lot of work has happened on may not move this year. In our committee, I'm thinking of the Global Warming Solutions Act. We do have some minor legislation in terms of expediting cell tower locations and things like that that actually relate directly to the current crisis. But generally, I think there's going to be a limit on how much the legislature can debate controversial issues and pass bills that are not the absolute must-have bills. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to, let's go to Dan. Okay, I think we got you there, Dan. So Dan Noyes.
Hey, thanks, Bruce, and thanks for all the work you've done setting this up. I really appreciate it. Definitely wanted to just echo a few things, like what Lucy said about the legislature now being a lot more accessible than it was with the YouTube. And I put in the notes section a link to all of the committee meetings for the upcoming week. It's updated every week, that one link. And it also has all the YouTube links so that you can watch the committee meetings. And if you're not available when they're happening live, you can always go back and stream them later. So I think it's, one of the things we haven't thought about is this really does give a lot more access to the work that we're doing down in Montpelier to our constituents. So I think that's great. So I'm on the Human Services Committee, and as I've talked about in the past, we really are looking at Department of Children and Families, Department of Health, and Department of Aging and Independent Living. So one of the things that's really come up to our attention is in foster care, there's a big concern with foster families whose birth parent has visitation rights. And now that, we're trying to stay 6 feet away and we're trying not to interact and let people into our homes or stay away from people just to keep that social distancing going, has been kind of a challenge for these families, especially when you have a birth family that's really, really been doing a lot of work to get their child back, and now all of a sudden there's this setback. So we're looking at that. The courts, of course, are now not operating as they have in the past, so that kind of slows it down. They basically, DCF asked for a ruling, and they said it had to be case by case. So we'll be looking at that in this coming week to see if there's any legislative changes that need to happen. We're also taking a look at childcare, and with a lot of the money that's coming in from the feds, our goal is to really try to make sure that our childcare system does not collapse during this time when, people aren't bringing their kids there. They don't have the income to pay. I mean, if you look at it, there's a lot of the money that goes to these childcare providers comes from the children that are, the families that are putting their children there. There is the amount from the state is not a significant amount for many childcare providers. And so the first few weeks they said that, the state would pay 100% even if the kids weren't there. They've since rolled that back a little bit and said that if you're on, you should pay 50% of your costs. So if you receive childcare financial assistance, you should pay half of what you normally pay. If you're a full pay, you should pay half. And then the state is making up the difference to try to make sure that these childcare providers are still going to be around after this is over. The next thing that we've been really talking about is making sure that older Vermonters have access to the services they need, especially around Meals on Wheels, and making sure that those agencies that provide those are funded, especially when they're seeing the amount of people that are taking advantage is going way up. The other thing that I have down here for notes is that, let's see, there was another thing that we had with Dale when they came in. A lot of folks with disabilities were concerned that they were not going to have access to PCAs. This is also with people who are on Choices for Care, because the reimbursement rates are so low for Medicaid reimbursement to these care providers. So we're really talking about making sure that they have access to added funding so that they can pay these people who are going into people's homes. There was a lot of talk about making sure that they had the equipment to go into people's homes and not have, spread any virus or get the virus. So the last couple things, I just want to talk about. Dave brought up the state colleges, and that's really important to communities that I represent. Being down $10 to $12 million is gonna make a big issue as we move forward. So I hope we can figure out that. And then Avram was talking about children whose families don't have the ability to afford internet, and I know Capstone has been working on that and trying to work with the superintendent's office, both Lamoille South and Lamoille North, to make sure that there's access to internet in these people's homes so that their children can continue to learn during this time. So I'll leave it at that.